First of all, I would like to offer my welcomes to the Khenpos and spiritual teachers from the various monasteries and nunneries, as well as to the monastics, and in particular the nuns from our nuns shutters, and also the people from the east and west who are watching this webcast. So I'd like to offer you an auspicious welcome. As I mentioned the other day, what I would like to speak about today is the practice of the path of the greater individual from the autobiographical verses of Good Deeds by Mikyo Dorje. And so in connection with that, I would like to speak about the Great Encampment's rules concerning meat. And in particular, I would like to speak about how the 8th Karmapa Mikyo Dorje prohibited meat, and how the Vinaya allows meat that is pure in the 3 ways. Now, I cannot speak about the entire subject of eating meat today, so I'll have to speak about half of it tomorrow, but in general, in the Great Encampment, there were very strict rules regarding meat. But these strict rules regarding meat did not start during the time of the 8th Karmapa. And this is an old rule or an old regulations or practice that was practiced during the times of several previous Karmapas. So how do we know that it was practiced during the time of the previous Karmapas? There is a text by the 9th Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje called The Great Rule Book for the Great Encampment, the Ornament of the World. And what this says is that the examples of the King of Dharma Drung Dzamlimpa, Lord Deshin Shekpa, glorious Tongwo Dundun, Kyawan Chura Gyatso are similar. In particular, they gathered only monastics around them. And those who were included in the encampment could not have any meat, not even the hair of a deer, or drink any alcohol, not even as much as the tip of a blade of grass. They performed untold actions of the higher states through the many customs of Sutra and Tantra and of the 2 traditions. After them, Lord Mikyo Dorje did not waver some deeds and examples. Not only that, he also brought practitioners of these Kamsan teachings into the methods of having revulsion, giving up the worldly activities and upholding the teachings through teaching, debate, and composition. He established new monastic communities, built statues, raised his students in hatstands, and wrote treatises beyond our conception. He guided his students to have confidence of examining the oceans of our own and other schools. His influence and kindness are indescribable. So this is what it says. Now, what this is describing is, the Drung Dzamble is a name of Rilpa Dorje. So Rilpa Dorje, Deshin Shekpa, Tongwo Dun, and Chura Gyatso. So during the time of those 4 Karmapas, no meat, not even the hair of a deer, could be allowed in the encampment, nor was there any alcohol, not even as much as would fit on the tip of a blade of grass. Similarly, there is a text called there's a text by Karma Chakme called "The Worlds of the Pendita Jamyan from the North: The Faults of Meat and Distinguishing What is Allowed and What is Prohibited." Now, what it says in this text is that there are always 500 bhikshus with outer robes around Rilpa Dorje. And he perfected the example of not allowing meat, not even the hair of a deer, to come into his sight. From that on time, most of the Dharma organizations founded by Lord Mikyo Dorje had strict rules against meat. At Ningling Monastery, there was no rule against meat, but a separate meat with a vegetarian stock, a separate soup with vegetarian stock was made for the vegetarians. The Karmapa and Heart Sons ate only vegetarian and never let any meat in their sight. In Ganachakras, the meat offering was eaten by everyone, and even the Karmapas and his Hatsan ate a small amount so as not to violate samaya. Now, what it says in the colophon, it says, meat and Ganachakra offerings were distinguished to the words that Sutras, Tantras, and Mahasiddhas, and following the example of the great encampment. So what this is saying is that, as it said in the citation from the 9th Karmapa, Wangchuk Dorje, from the time of the 4th Karmapa onward, it was not allowed to bring any meat, not even as much as the hair from an animal, into the great encampment. And so they gave that pure example, and from that time, the various incarnations of the karma continued to uphold, preserve, and spread that example. In particular, most of the monasteries founded by Mikkyur Dorje had very strict rules against meat. And there was a monastery called Nyingma Monastery. This was a Shedra that was founded by the 6th Shamar Chökyi Wangchuk. And Kama Chukme went to this so he studied at this monastery and knew it very well. So at that monastery, there was no rule against meat. There was a particular vegetarian soup that was made with a vegetarian stock that was made separately for the vegetarians. Likewise, the Karmapa 10th Karmapa Chökyi Dorje and his Heart Sons included Shama Chökyi Wangchuk only ate vegetarian and never allowed any meat in their sight. However, when they had Ganachakras, even everyone who is ordinarily vegetarian ate a small amount of the meat offering. And even the Karmapa and his Heart Son, so as not to violate the secret mantra of Vajrayana, ate a small amount of meat. And so that is what it explains in detail. And so for that reason, if we look at these sources, what we can know is that from the time of Rilpa Dorje, the great encampment had become much larger and more organized at that time, as I explained the other day. And there are very strict rules about meat. And I think these strict rules of meat could be said to be a distinctive feature of the great encampment, and I don't think it would be going too far to say that. Now, what source do we have? What clear source do we have and reliable source do we have to say that these rules were originated during the time of the 4th Karmapa Rilpa Dorje? Well, in the liberation story of Rilpa Dorje called Delighting the Skies, written by his direct disciple Karma Kun Shun, it says, all the members of his entourage lived off the 3 white foods. If the bones of a slaughtered animal were seen in the places where the masters and disciples had stayed, they were reprimanded. Not even the scent of toxins such as alcohol was allowed to waft within the confines of the encampment. He brought everyone into pure conduct. So here it says the entourage of Rilpa Dorje, but also all the people who were around him, they lived off of the 3 white phones. And when the master and disciples saw, if they were to see the bones of slaughtered animals when a camp was taken down, they would reprimand people. And there was no way to bring alcohol and intoxicants inside the camp. Likewise, there is a liberation story of Rilpa Dorje by his student, Tsurpa Kumbangpa. There was no way that even the tiniest amount of meat or the mere scent of alcohol could be in the encampment. His conduct was the perfection of purity, and the power of his compassion extremely great. When people gathered, from hundreds of thousands at most, or no less than 500 at the least, the greatest developed shamatha and insight, the middling developed certainty in the meaning of the words, and even the least committed to continue reciting mantras. to encourage the people in the area to give up killing sentient beings and to recite the names of the Buddhas. His example of benefiting beings in many skip of ways is inconceivable. So during the life of Ronpo Dorje, the liberation stories written by his direct disciples describe this very clearly. So I think that these are a really good source. So, well, it says that we say that it's very strict that this meat was strictly prohibited in the encampment. So how strict was the how strict were the encampment's rules about meat? Well, I think if we look at the 9th Karmapa's rules for the encampment, we can understand this one. What it says in these: during the great festival of the encampment, meat may not be eaten. And so what this is saying, forget about it. No need to mention the ordinary times, but even when we're having great festivals such as New Year's or when we're having larger meals, even during those times, meat was not allowed. Meat was served. And so it's not necessarily to mention about the ordinary times during the meat. Even at Losara, you were not allowed at all to bring meat, to serve meat. This is very clear that this was prohibited. It also says in the rules for the encampment, if meat were offered, actually make 100-fold offering were not allowed. Except at sacred sites and during rituals, one may not combine festivals and service at will and hold a Gana Chakra. During regular pujas also, there should be no dedicated meat. No one inside or outside the encampment should slaughter an animal or butcher it. This is extremely important. If anyone should do this, they must carry the Karmapa in his heart sons, and if they still do not listen, they will be expelled from the encampment or given the lowest position, whichever is appropriate. And so the meaning of this is that if someone were to offer meat to the Karmapa and his disciples, it would say that it says you could not include it, that the meat could not be listed in the list of offerings, and you weren't allowed to include it in the offers listed in the offerings listed. Similarly, when the great encampment went to a sacred site, or when there are special times, such as the celebrations of the anniversaries of the passings of the previous Karmapas, during those times one could have a Gana Chakra. Otherwise, during regular pujas or in other situations, you couldn't just say, I'm going to have a Gana Chakra and have it. You weren't allowed to just have any Gana Chakra you wanted, because you could call something a Gana Chakra and eat meat, so you weren't allowed to have Gana Chakras. Likewise, no matter whether you're inside or outside the encampment, you couldn't slaughter any animal at all. You also could not butcher a slaughtered animal, and this is extremely important. And if there was someone who did this, someone who actually did that, or who had a connection or participated in it, they would have to take responsibility for the lives of the Karmapa and his heart sons, and if still did not listen, they would be expelled from the encampment. They would not be allowed to remain within the encampment, or they would be demoted to the lowest position. So whatever rank they would be at, they'd be demoted. And so this would be, the punishment would be appropriate to the circumstances and the time. Now if we look at this time, if we think that if someone were expelled from the great encampment, they could go somewhere else, but it was not so easy at that time. Once someone was expelled from the great encampment, no other Karma Kagyu monastery or association would be allowed to take care of that person. Not only was one expelled from the good encampment, but you were also expelled from the Karma Kaju. That's how it was. And so for these reasons, it was extremely strict. So what is the reason why the meat was prohibited so strictly in the encampment? Well, there are many reasons, of course. But the main reason is that there are hundreds of thousands of people in the encampment, and so if you were to serve meat for them, there would be the danger that many sentient beings would be specifically killed for that purpose. And so that is, I think, the reason why the meat was prohibited in the encampment. And if you need to serve meat to that many people, you can't wait until there are enough corpses of dead animals. So you'd have to kill animals. And therefore you'd be... And so then this would be animal that is dedicated to them, or in terms of Vinaya, this is called meat that is impure in the three ways. And so there's a great difficulty or great harm to eating that. So I think that is the main reason why this was prohibited. Now in particular, so we're speaking about the time of Mikyo Dorje, and so for that reason, so what is the example that Mikyo Dorje gave about meat? He especially strictly, he had made especially strict prohibitions against eating meat. Now, there are many reasons why he did this. Now, for one perspective is, as I said before, when he was young. The seventh Karmapa Chudachaso had passed away. And from that time until Mikyo Dorje was enthroned in the Great Encampment, the rules and regulations of the previous time all were disregarded, and basically all the sentient beings that were all the animals that were offered were killed and eaten, and their meat was eaten, and so that was the situation. And so when Mikyo Dorje actually saw these situations, and when he realized what a difficulty it was bringing, and Mikyo Dorje himself came to be a bit older and gained a bit of power himself, he strictly prohibited meat in the encampment and was very strict and very insistent about it. Not only in the Great Encampment, he also encouraged people, or he started a movement, we would say these days, started a movement to prevent the eating of meat all over Tibet. The way we know this is that in the catalog of his collected works by the fifth Shama, there is a text called A Letter to My Defenseless Mothers, primarily in the land of snows, about how eating meat is wrong. So there's a text with this title. That was like an announcement or a spread throughout all of Tibet. But we don't have this text right now, but I think that someday we will get a copy of it. Even though we don't know exactly what is said in the text, just seeing the title, what we can understand is that he is not only in the Great Encampment and the monasteries and monasteries he founded, he's really publicized widely that it was all over Tibet that eating meat is inappropriate. And so I think we can understand this just from the title. Also, just give some citation as a support for this, there is Sangye Paldrup's commentary on the autobiographical versus good deeds, in which it says, no matter what region he traveled to, he skillfully prevented people from eating meat. In Kongpo, because of the region, he was unable to prevent eating meat. And it was due to this that he did not go for alms in Kongpo, Mongol regions, or other regions where they only ate meat, it is said. So it's basically said, wherever he went, wherever region he went to, he went in a very skillful way, not forcefully, not forcefully. He would prevent people from eating meat. But in Kongpo, because of the situation of the region, it was difficult to prevent people from eating meat. So in Kongpo and so you know some Mongol regions. So Mongol regions here means the northern regions in the region of Changtang, where there was very little to eat other than meat. And so these are regions where one only ate meat, and so in those regions he would not usually go for alms and so forth. And the reason he wouldn't go is that because in those regions they only ate meat, they didn't have anything else to eat. And so everyone would say that it was that this is the reason why he didn't go to these regions. So that is one thing. And it's not only that. And Mikyo Dorje is in his. We see this in the text that Mikyo Dorje wrote himself. There are many, very forceful things about not eating meat. For example, from his great commentary on the Vinaya, he wrote, "Further, if you put meat, alcohol, and so forth in the Gutora and other certain kinds of torma, you are not taking me as a teacher, you are not appropriate to be my disciple, you are not taking me as a guru." What the meaning of this is, when you're doing the Gutora, the Mahakala, when we have the great Mahakala pujas, if as for the materials, as the ingredients of the pujas, if we actually put meat, you're supposed to put actually meat and alcohol in this, but he said you're not allowed to do this. If you do this, then you are not taking me as my teacher, you're not considering my teacher, and I don't think of you as my students. And so you really need to think, as this is basically what he's saying. So he's really saying very, very forcefully. And so Jesus spoke about this very strongly. So he's basically saying there's nothing else to say, but you had to follow it. So many people used to say this. Many people have said to me that said the Karmapa has said that if the Karmapa says that if you don't give up meat, you're not a Kajupa, but this is just being too bold. And so they're saying this to me. And they're saying that you say that if you don't give up meat, you're not a Kajupa. And it's not saying, I'm saying that you're eating Kajupa. Now, I can't decide whether someone else is a Kajupa. I don't have any ability to tell whether someone's Kajupa or not. But in 2004, when I was talking about preventing the eating meat, I quoted some texts of Mikyo Dorje when he said that, and said that the Mikyo Dorje and other previous Kajus had said this. And so what people thought at that time is that I was saying this. And so they thought it was me who was saying that. So similarly, Mikyo Dorje also wrote in his 100 short instructions. What it says there. Here it is important that once we go forth, we must give up the 8 impure things. We must hold back from meat, alcohol, armors, weapons, riding animals and pack animals, business including interest, crops and houses, and milking and animal husbandry for even a minute. In particular, we should give up even looking at meat, alcohol, and weapons. If you do not give up these 8, you are not part of this Kaju lineage, so it is important to put this into practice. Well, this is what he says there. And so what this is saying is that you need to give up these 8 individual things from the moment you go forth and become a monastic. So once you've become a monastic, you must give up these 8 things. And what are these 8 things? Now, there are many different ways you can count these, but for Mikyo Dorje, in his thought, the 8 are meat, alcohol, armors, weapons, riding animals and pack animals, business including interest, crops and houses, and milking and animal husbandry. So meat, alcohol, armor, weapons, animals, business including interest, crops and houses, farming, and milking and animal husbandry. Particularly for that you weren't even to look at meat, alcohol, and weapons. You weren't even allowed to look at them. Forget about actually using them. You weren't allowed to look at them. And if you do not give them up, you are not part of this Kagyu lineage, so it is important to put them into practice. So the monastics who do not give these out are not part of the Kagyu lineage, he is saying. So this is Mikyo Dorje. It's not that Mikyo Dorje is just being audacious and saying this or making it up. So what is the source for saying that if you don't give up the 8, you are not a Kagyupa? There are quite citations that Lord Gampopa himself cited. And what it says in the sutra that Gampopa cited is that in the future there will be students who give up the 8 impure things. And so these are things that the followers of the Kagyu must therefore follow. And for that reason, the followers of the Kagyu followers of the Kagyu lineage must give up these 8 things. Now, there are other ways of there are many different ways that the 8 things are explained. Now, I haven't seen the other versions, but Mikyo Dorje explains them in the way that I've just mentioned. And so there are reasons for him to say this. It is not just that he was making an order and being strict about it. It's that you're not allowed to do this because he said so. That's not how he said it. And so for that reason, in Tibet, because of the geography, it is extremely difficult to give up meat. In particular, during the time of Karmapa Mikyo Dorje and our present Mikyo Dorje and our present way of living, there's been huge changes in the lifestyle. This changed like 10 times as much. So like we looked at the time of, if you say in meat time, in Mikyo Dorje, if you're saying you shouldn't eat meat, then it's basically the same, you shouldn't eat. Because if you didn't eat meat, there wasn't a lot you could eat. I saw an old book about the list of Tibetan foods. When you looked at them, there were like 100 different Tibetan foods. And 90% of them were all meat. There are very few. That's the actual situation. Forget about other situations. When I was young, when I was born in a nomad family, and I was born in the nomad family, then if you didn't eat meat, then you'd eat butter, and the Tibetan cheesecake, and drink butter, and drink milk. And other than that, there's nothing to eat. There were no vegetables. Okay, you'd eat samba. So other than that, there really wasn't much else to do. It was really difficult, I think. In the actual fact, it was very difficult to do this. And because it was so difficult, the masters of the great Tibetan master of the past did not particularly say that you should stop eating meat. However, the past Kagyu masters considered it very important to give up meat. And they spoke about the faults, the problems of eating meat and drinking alcohol. And they spoke about the reasons for giving up meat. So I don't need to speak about them all today. I think I'll speak about them tomorrow. I'll speak about how the Kagyu forefathers spoke about not eating meat, and how the masters of other lineages also spoke about not eating meat. So I think I can speak about those tomorrow. So next, what I'd like to speak about is meat that is pure in the 3 ways. So when we talk about meat that has the threefold purity, It's something that actually there's some debates about, there's some issues there. And I don't need to speak about the debates right now. First, I'll speak about the meat that is pure in the three ways. And then after that, I won't need to debate it. We'll just... Now, the meat that is pure in the three ways is just taught in the Vinaya. And since it's taught in the Vinaya, so I thought I'd speak about this. I almost forgot. Okay, now in Sanskrit and Pali and Chinese and Tibetan, there are the Vinaya scriptures of various schools. So there are several different scriptures, and if we look at them, that our teacher, the Bhagavan, Buddha, paid great attention to the food and conduct of his students in the monastic community. He gave them a lot of advice. In particular, food is a daily necessity for anyone, for any being that is living. You cannot do without it. And since it is a necessity, there's no choice but to eat. And since you have to eat, then at that time in India, there are many different religions or many different philosophical schools, and many of those religions considered practicing austerities to be extremely important. And there are traditions of practicing severe austerities regarding food that would be hard for ordinary people to practice. But the Buddha himself, before he achieved awakening, practiced austerities for 6 years. As he had total experience of practicing experience, and because he had that experience, he knew that liberation cannot be achieved through austerities alone. And he himself stopped practicing austerities. And after he stopped practicing austerities, he taught his students, and in particular his monastic students, he said that they should not have a livelihood that is so austere that the body cannot tolerate it, that the body cannot bear it. So we should not have that sort of life. Nor should there be such a luxurious lifestyle that one becomes careless. Instead, he instructed students on how to live a lifestyle that does not fall into either extreme, and established codes related to this. In particular, it's necessary to have food every day to continue living, so you have to eat. But that food, we should think about that food as medicine and eat it at the right time and in moderation. And if we were to eat just like dogs or pigs, that wouldn't be okay. And the food that we eat is that for the food, the monastics should go out on alms rooms on every day and eat whatever the faithful donors give. Other than that, they should not choose which one they like better or not, or eat food that is too elaborate, or store food, and so forth. None of that was allowed. So I think that the meat that is pure in the three ways, I think, came around for such reasons and such situations. I think this is very clear. This is because, in general, what we must understand is that from ancient times until present, India has always been the country where there's the largest numbers of vegetarians. It is the country where the most people do not eat meat. In particular, the Brahmin caste was at that time considered the highest caste, and most people in the Brahmin caste at that time did not eat meat. Now, some scholars say that in the past Brahmins did eat meat, but later they didn't. So people do say this, but in our Vinaya texts, it seems from reading those that the high caste Brahmins did not eat meat. So even when the monastics went on their alms round, I think there were very few people who offered them meat, because there, in the region, there are just so few people who eat meat. So when you went for that region for alms, there are few people who would give meat. Likewise, when the monastics went on their alms round, they didn't only go to the high caste households for alms. They also would go to the doors of low caste households and request food and ask for alms. And these lower castes, if there were a family where they ate meat, it's possible that they might eat. And if they offered meat, if we talk about it fundamentally, when you accept alms, you have to take the alms. You have to accept the alms. And if you didn't take the alms, then the donor might think they're being insulted or think they're not being given an opportunity to gather merit. So that is how people would see it. And so for that reason, so the Bhagavan Buddha at that time was different than the others. He said that did not consider whether costs are high or low, and thought that there needed connections needed to be made people of every level of society. So fundamentally, whether they're rich or not, one had to eat whatever food was the donors offered, and was not made to choose, I'm going to eat this but not eat that. The monastics didn't have a choice to make were not allowed to make that individual choice. Now, does this mean that according to the Vinaya, that the monastics may eat any meat that is offered to them? It's probably not that sort of situation. That is not how it is. And how we know this is that in Tibetan we have the Uttara Grantha Vinaya text to the Mula Sarvastivada tradition. Now, I don't need to say what it says, but the main point of this is that there are several types of meat that one should not eat, such as the flesh of some types of birds, including owls, of reptiles and amphibians, such as toads, of the meat of carnivores, such as lions, tigers, and bears. These types of meat were not allowed to eat. Not only were you not allowed to eat those type of meat, you weren't allowed to eat the fat or the other juices of these inappropriate meats, and also raw meat was not allowed to be eaten. And the monastics were not allowed to eat meat killed specifically for the monastic's sake. And so many of these. So there's several of these types of meat were not allowed to be eaten at all, whether or not they were pure in the three ways or not. There's no need to look at whether they were pure in the three ways or not. They're just not allowed to eat them. But if the meat was allowed, if it's not in that list of inappropriate meats, if it is an appropriate meat, you should first examine whether it is pure in the three ways. And if it is pure in the three ways, you can eat it. If it is not pure in the three ways, then you may not eat it. And so for that reason, you'd have to first examine whether it is pure in the three ways or not. And if not, if you just do whatever you want and eat it without caring, there's the danger that you have the offense of eating impure meat. And so for that reason, so you need to think about whether the meat was pure in the three ways or not. Now the question is, who does this determination of whether meat is pure in the three ways apply to? Because the Buddha had both monastic and lay students. So is this determination of meat being pure in the three ways, is this for monastics? Or is it for the lay students? Or is it for both monastic and lay students? If you ask this, it's primarily for the monastic. And this is very, it's clear that this, so. However, in these days, there are some scriptures of the Vinaya from different schools that we still can read that state that even people with the lay precepts should eat only meat that is pure in the three ways. But in general, in terms of the Vinaya, a pure meat that is pure in the three ways, primarily a rule and a presentation for the monastics. And so this is quite clear. So I think it's probably better to take a break now. So we'll take a break, and then we'll see whether this meat is pure in the three ways or not.
아주 가수대 디 넘숨탑에 샤 넘숨탑에 샤의 제반세의控制不지
Next we need to cover the sources for determining what meat that is triply pure or pure in the three ways comes from. So I'd like to show this to you. Now I forgot to show you this here. These are the words from the these are the quotes from the ninth Karmapas. From the ninth Karmapa's rules for the rules for the guard encampment. Now these are the quotes from the Vinaya commentary, the Orb of the Sun, and from the 100 Short Instructions. So now here, maybe perhaps it's better to start out explaining this way. Now, the sources for the background story for the meat that is pure in the three ways. In the 4th century, there was a Vinaya master Chinese Vinaya master named Vinaya Life. He was one of the earliest who went to, and he went to the. He was a Sri Lankan master. He went to the. And he was one of the earliest masters who went to China, the Sri Lankan master, and he wrote these. Travel account of his travels to going to that. This Chinese master went to India, and the main reason he went was to find complete texts on the Vinaya. So that is the reason why he went from China to India. And so when he returned to China from India, he brought with him many Vinaya texts from different schools. And at the same time, he brought a Sinhalese or Sri Lankan manuscript. There was a master called Chatspin or Chipin, a small country that in the 5th century was to the west of China. And there was a Vinaya master named Bidulai from that region. And he broke it down in Chinese, and then a master named Dharma Light then translated. And so this is 5 sections of the Vinaya of the Mahesheshika school. And so the manuscript for this was the one that was brought from Sri Lanka. And so this is translated by the master, the Ornament of Prajna is the name of the master. Now I forgot it. I translated this the other day, but I don't think it turn out exactly right. I said it didn't. I don't think it turned out all quite right, but I thought it just. I translated it I basically translated it to give something to show to all of you. And what it says is, when the Tathagata was traveling to Vaishali, he went to a monastery where he taught the Dharma on the banks of Markata Hrada. So this is the region of Vaishali. There's a place called Markatashara. So it's like a river or a lake. The reason why it's called the monkey pond. Actually, and the reason it was called this is called the Markata or monkey pond. He stayed at a monastery at that point. On that occasion, there was a general named Lion. He said the general named Lion in our Mulasarvastivada Vinaya strictures that are in the Tibetan tradition, in the Tibetan Kanjura. This is mentioned. He is mentioned in the Mulasarvastivada inscriptions. But there are two different translations. There are two different ways the name is translated. One is translated as the captain, Senge. Another is translated as the general, but the same person. If we look for the general Lion, there was a merchant, or there was a general named Lion who served the Sangha, and at the later time he became very poor and had very little to eat, and so this is in our Vinaya scriptures. If you look for the general Lion, you will see many of these events described. And so this general, so I'll explain more about this. Captain Lion, I always said, and basically when you say captain or general, the meaning is the same. And his name was Lion or Simha. And he was a student of the Jain Chichinigranta. He was a student of the teacher Naganta, who was a Jain teacher at the time of the Buddha. So he had heard that the Bhagavan came to this town and heard the great renown of the name Tathagata, complete perfect Buddha. With delight he said, "I would like to see such a Tathagata and hear the Dharma." And he immediately prepared us to ride and left. Now I will just say the main point of the meaning. You can read it. So he understood that he heard that the Buddha said, "This is wonderful. I'd like to go see the Buddha and hear the Dharma," he said. And so he immediately got his horses and carriage ready and went to go see the Buddha. And from afar away, he saw the body of the Tathagatas of the body that was like a mountain of gold. And when he saw that, he came before the Buddha, prostrated with his head to the Buddha's feet, and sat to one side. And after he sat down, the Bhagavan taught for the general Simha's court. He taught the many teachings on the four noble truths. And while he was sitting there, he gained the immaculate eye of Dharma, which means that he saw the truth. He saw the nature of the truth. Then the general had got up and he kneeled, and he said, "I would like to invite the Buddha and the entire Sangha to a meal. And would it be okay?" he said. And when he asked this, the Buddha then said, "Accepted." He said, "It's okay." And the general understood that the Buddha had accepted, and he was really happy. And he went back to his house, and he told the people who would often buy meat for him to buy all the meat of all the animals, of animals who had died, who had not been slaughtered, but people who had naturally died, to buy all of that meat, regardless of the cost. And when he bought them all, then that person went and bought all the meat of animals who had recently died, and then he spent the entire night making all the various different delicious meat dishes. And the next morning, when the sun rose, they then prepared the seats, and when everything was ready, and he went back to the Buddha, the general went back to see the Buddha and said, "Now, the food and the seats are all ready. So now please, Buddha, tell me when you're going to come." And then the Bhagavan immediately, with an entourage of the Sangha, went to the general's house. And they sat down on the seats that the general had prepared, and the general himself, with his own hands, actually served the sangha. And he was very what happened, instead of, he didn't get all frenzied, but he was really happy. And then at that point, there are the students of the Jain teacher Nagranta, and his students had heard that the General Lion had invited the Buddha and the Sangha and prepared a great feast offering with meat. And they got really envious of this. And because the reason for that is that he was a student of the Jain teacher Nigranta. And now he was a student of Nigranta, but now he was like making offering to the Buddha. They got really jealous of this. And so what they did is they went down the sides and they went all the intersections of the roads, and they said as loud as this thing, as loud as they can, General Lion has turned away from his teacher. He's lost the meaning of Dharma. But if we say these days, he's broken his commitments. And today he has offered the meat of goats that have been killed, and offered them to the false spiritual teacher Gautama. That is an incorrect spiritual teacher. And so they said this like with song and melodies. And they went down all the different roads, the side roads, and everywhere, declaring this. And they went to see this. And now the bhikshus heard this, right? The bhikshus who came with the Buddha heard this. And when they heard it, they didn't dare to eat. And when they didn't dare to eat, then the General Lion saw this, and he understood this, and he immediately knelt down with his knee on the ground and said to the Buddha, "The students of Nigranta have despaired to the Buddha, saying that he's doing something that he hasn't. If from today on, as long as I live, I will not intentionally knife. And if I make that, and so these the meat that you're eating is not food that was slaughtered to eat, and so it's naturally animals that died a natural death. So the bhikshus not have any suspicions or have doubts." And the Bhagavan said to the bhikshus, "Oh, okay, you don't need to worry about it. Enjoy it as you wish. Please have your meal." And then after the meal, then he distributed water for them to wash their hands. Then in the old tradition, then they sat down on a small seat in front of the Buddha, and the Buddha said words of rejoicing and told him how it was good that he had made the offering, and very good that he had made the offering to the Sangha. And so he said these words of praise and rejoicing, and then the Buddha rose from his seat and left. And then when he went back, they'd gone to the General Lion's house and eaten the meal, and the non-Buddhists had despaired to the Buddha and said there's so much that happened that the Bhagavan then gathered all the Sangha. He summoned all the Sangha, and he said to them in particular, and what he said to them is, in the future, when we eat meat, there are three types that we must not eat. And what these three are, as meats where we have seen, heard, or had suspicions. When he said meat, then we said seeing or hearing or having suspicions. So seeing means when you actually see the slaughter yourself. Hearing means that if there's an individual whom you have confidence, who's credible, and actually hear that from them that it was killed for your sake. And suspicion means that if you suspect that it was killed for your sake. Well, those are what it should be. And if you see, have not seen, have not heard, or have no suspicion that it was slaughtered for your sake, then that is pure meat. And then you can eat it as you wish. If the animal was slaughtered for the sake of a bhikshu or bhikshus or novices, we're not allowed to eat it. But there's something strange in here, though. It's something strange. It says, if it's killed for the sake of a bhikshu, bhikshus and novices are not allowed to it. Bhikshunis, nuns, and nuns in trainings, novice nuns, and laymen. And so, like basically, if it's killed for a bhikshu, as bhikshus and novices are not allowed to eat it. But then it says bhikshus and nuns in training are allowed, and novices. Now, if it is killed for bhikshunis, nuns in training, or novices, then the bhikshunis, nuns, and novices and laymen are not allowed to eat it. So basically, it's saying that those for whose sake it was slaughtered are not allowed to eat it. Now, as I mentioned before, this is the background story, or the source for the rules about the not eating meat that has impure in the three sorts of ways. Now, also, in terms of the Vinayavastu, or the topics of the Vinaya of the Mula Sarvastivada in the Tibetan tradition, there's a very similar text, and so that is a text. Generally, it's a similar. And the Buddha was staying in the house on the bank on the Markatahasa in Vaishali. And here, then, a captain named Nulavai. So if you search for someone named a captain named lion, then you find this one. If you look for a general lion, then you won't find it. But because there are different events described above them, so the words are slightly different, but the actual meaning is the same. In any case, what is in Tibetan, if you compare what is in the Tibetan scriptures and what is in the Mahashashaka scriptures that are preserved in Chinese, I think that the Mahashashaka scriptures are actually clearer, as I see it. But in any case, when the Buddha was... Basically, the story is that because these Jain students had said that General Lion had given meat to the Sangha, and they said that it was killed specifically for the Sangha, that's the reason, that's the event behind the rules for not eating the three types of meat. Now also, there also is a quotation from the there is also a scripture from the there is also a scripture there's a Tamra Shatya school, which is written in text. Now, it's preserved in Chinese as well, and I have translated from that to quote it. It says, "Received with seeing. What is gained by seeing? If you do not see an under their individual, kill it. But to receive it for a bhikkhu's sake, there's no offense if you eat it," and so forth. Now, the Tamrashita, this is one of the 18 original schools of Buddhism, and this is this is a school that primarily developed in Sinnar, the region of Sri Lanka, and so this is recorded in the histories. This Tamrashitya school is actually considered like the source of the Theravada the source of the Theravada school, and so it's considered part of the Theravada school. And they also have a text called "The Great Treasury of All That Is Seen to Be Excellent," or the Samatapasa. And this is in the Pali language. And I think that this is a very detailed description of the three meat that is impure for the three reasons. So I have translated this quotation from Chinese. And so what it says is, if I read it, it's strange, but basically the main meanings, the main points of this is, there's received through seeing. There are three ways that you can get it. There's the way from receiving it through seeing. When receiving through seeing means, if you see another individual, slaughter the animal. But if it is not for the bhikshu's sake, you see this individual centered, but then later, then you get the meat, but there's no offense of meeting that meat, because it was not killed for that monastic, so there's no offense to eat it. Now, received through hearing says if the bhikshu himself hears the sound of the slaughter, he hears the sound of the animal being slaughtered, and that is, but it was not slaughtered for the bhikshu's sake, then if the bhikshu receives the meat and eats it, there is no offense. Now, that is received through hearing. Received through suspicion means that when bhikshus go to the town on their alms round and see fresh meat that the donors have fresh meat, and if they're seeing fresh meat, the bhikshus might think that it is killed for the bhikshus. Now, if the donor then says that it is not killed specifically for the bhikshus, then there is no offense to eating that meat. Likewise, if the donor invites bhikshus, and one of them is senior and one is junior, now they both come, and when they offered meat to the two of them, when offering that meat, if the junior thinks, okay, this meat was slaughtered for the senior bhikshus, it wasn't slaughtered for my sake, so if I eat it, there won't be an offense. If they think that. Now, the elder monk thinks, this is killed for the junior monk's bhikshu's sake, not for mine, so if I eat it, there won't be an offense. And so they each harbor these doubts about each other. And because they have these doubts, they can't really decide, and they don't really know. If they both eat it, then there's no offense. If it was killed for a bhikshu's sake, but the bhikshu does not know is offered to it until after he's eaten it, then there's no offense because he didn't know. But the most important thing is that when the bhikshu is offered meat, then the bhikshu has to ask questions. When you say, was this slaughtered for my sake? You have to ask. If you do not ask, then you cannot determine whether the meat was impure in the three ways or not. For example, it's similar, like pork and bear are very similar. So when you're offered it, you have to ask, is this bear meat? Because you're not allowed to eat bear meat. And so for that reason, you need to ask. It's very important to ask the questions. So the most important thing it depends upon, not upon the person who's receiving it, but upon the donors. So the donor generally knows, so the bhikshu must ask the donor about the meat. And so that describes it very, very clearly. So now I basically just translated them, and I didn't have time to proofread them properly, proofread the spelling properly. Now, if you look at this, this citation, in the time of the Tamarashita, similar from the quotation from that, when bhikshus are going on their alms round, if they're going to beg for food, basically, when they're offered food, then before they accept, they have to ask about it. You need to examine whether it is pure in the three ways or not. If it is for your own sake, or if it's for the sake of the monastics, if it is meat that the animal is slaughtered for their purpose and then offered, then it is impure meat and it may not be eaten. And so what this shows is that the bhikshus, if they eat it, if the bhikshus are not careful about eating animals that are slaughtered for their sake, then there's the danger that many animals will be slaughtered for the sake of the sangha, and so for that reason, there's a harm to doing this. That is why there's an offense. Now, there's also a Sarvastivada scripture called the 10 Sections of the Vinaya. And this is from the Sarvastivada tradition. It is in the Chinese tradition, and there's a spelling mistake that I need to mistake. if I don't fix it, I won't feel comfortable. So now the spelling is fixed. So this the 10 sections of the Vinaya, the Dashabhanavara Vinaya of the Sarvastivada tradition writes. What it says here is, to that circumstance, the Bhagavan assembled the Sangha. Now, so as I mentioned before, there was the event that happened with the generalist lion. And because of that circumstance, the Bhagavan assembled the Sangha, and he spoke to the Sangha. And when he said to them, what he said is, you may not eat pure meat that is pure in the 3 ways. And what are the 3 ways? By seeing with your own eyes, or hearing with your ears, or suspecting in your mind. If that happens, then you're not allowed to eat the meat. What is seeing with your eyes is in your actual sight. You see a living creature slaughtered for your own sake. That is seeing on your own. And seeing means if a credible individual, if any old person comes and say it was slaughtered for your sake, you shouldn't believe him. But if it's a credible individual who tells you that living being was slaughtered for your sake, then that type of meat shouldn't be eaten. Now, what is pure suspicions? And therefore, there are some circumstances that you have suspicion. Like there's some reason why you think that. Like maybe there's, like the Vidula, there's like no butcher in that region. And because there's no butcher, then it's possible that that the household itself must have slaughtered the animal. Since there's no butcher to slaughter the animals, it's probably the household that had slaughtered it. And there were no animals that died naturally in that region. And the leader of the household is someone who does a lot of misdeeds and kills many animals, then there's a danger that they killed it for your sake. Then there's a reason to have a suspicion, and so you should not eat that. Now, meat. So that is the way that there are 3 reasons why meat would be impure. Now, meat that is pure of those 3 ways may be eaten. So this is what it says in the Sarvastivada scriptures. Likewise, in Chinese Buddhism, like for example in Tibet, we practice the Mula Sarvastivada tradition. That is our Vinaya practice. And now in the Chinese Buddhism, we primarily practice the Dharmaguptaka tradition. So here is something that I've translated from the Chinese. I do not allow you to eat meat that is impure because of these 3 reasons. Because if you see that it's slaughtered for your sake, or hear from a credible individual that is killed for his sake, and here what's special here is if you go to that household and you see the animal's head or the animal's hide or the animal's hair and so forth, or if you see the feet and limbs and so forth and the blood and so forth, or if the individual, the leader, the head of the household, is someone who acts on the 10 virtuous actions and always kills or habitually kills, then there's the danger that it was killed for your own sake. And for that reason, if you have suspicions, then you may not eat that meat. Meat that is pure in the 3 ways may be eaten. And so that means if you have not seen, have not heard, and do not suspect, if it's pure of being seen or hearing or suspicion, then it may be eaten. Likewise, there's the Mahashashika school. And from the 5 sections of Vinaya from the Mahishashika school, there's a very similar scripture, but what's a little bit different about it. It's basically the same, but what's different about this is that in this, if it's killed for bhikshu and bhikshus, then, as I said, it's similar to what I said before. It's killed for the sake of bhikshu. Bhikshus and novices are not allowed to it. If it is killed for bhikshus and nuns in trainings, bhikshus and bhikshunis and novices and lay people are able to eat it. So basically, those for whose sake the animal was slaughtered are not allowed to eat the meat. Now the last citation I'd like to give is from the Mahasanghika Vinaya. And this Mahasanghika Vinaya is probably only in Chinese. How this Chinese came is that in the fourth monk, as I mentioned before, the Chinese monk Dharma Light went to India. And from in central India, he got this text. Then he brought it back to China. Later, then the Indian master, he translated it with the Indian master Buddhabhadra. He translated it together with Buddhabhadra. Now, what it says in here, it says, slaughtered for one's own sake means slaughtered for a bhikshu's sake. Slaughtered for a bhikshu's sake may not be a bhikshu, bhikshuni, nun in training, a novice nun, layman, or layman. So it's a little bit different than what was said in the Mahishashika school. So basically it's saying that no one who is a monastic may eat the meat. So the bhikshu, if it's now the Mahishashika school said if it's killed for the bhikshu, then only the bhikshu is not allowed to eat it, but the others may eat it. But here it says that any monastic may not eat it. So if it's the Mahishashika school says that if it's killed for the bhikshu's sake, then the bhikshus and the novices may not eat it, but the others may eat it. But here it says that if it's slaughtered for a bhikshu, then it may not be eaten for the bhikshu, bhikshunis, nuns and trainees, novices, and so forth. It's the same. It is the same for what is slaughtered for a layperson's sake. Now this is very difficult. It is the same for what is slaughtered for a layperson's sake. It may not be eaten by any bhikshu, through it may not be eaten by any lay people. It is the same. If what is slaughtered for it is the same for anyone, for any bhikshu or bhikshuni or so forth. If it's slaughtered for a lay person, then it may not be eaten by the bhikshus, the novices, the bhikshunis, and so forth. So, except for the three types that are the three types, those that are from seeing, hearing, and suspecting. And so, I've given quotations from 5 of the 18 original schools of Buddhism. So basically the citations from 5 of the different Vinaya, and most of these I have translated from the Chinese. And among them, the first 3 are probably taught for the bhikshus. And the last 2 also say that household or lay practitioners with the 5 precepts, whether male or female, may not eat the meat that is impure in the 3 ways. Whether you're bhikshu, whether you are a monastic or a lay people, it's important to know whether the meat is pure in the 3 ways. So basically, in all the different in all the types of Vinaya, it is important that we know what it is important to eat meat that is pure in the 3 ways. And so we need to understand what the 3 pure meat is pure in the 3 ways. So what does it mean to say it's 3 in the pure ways? So what it means. So what it means essentially is of whether it is a chicken or a pig or whether it's an ox. If you actually see with your own, if you don't see with your own eyes that it's slaughtered for your sake, or no one else tells you that it was slaughtered for your sake, so you don't hear it from anyone else, and that person who has to be someone that's credible, not just some ordinary person, it has to be not just any old person. And if there's a suspicion or doubt that it might have been slaughtered for your own sake, you should not have any such doubt. When we talk about the threefold purity, it has to be free of the being seen, heard, or the suspicion. And so that's not actually all that easy. In particular, if we think about the crux or the essence, if we talk about the most clear descriptions of this are in the Sarvastivada and the Dharmaguptaka Vinaya. if we do it according to the Sarvastivada, it means that in that place that there is a butcher's house, it died naturally, and the householder did not kill for your sake. This is what it says, right? The three aspects that need to be there. That household is not a butcher. The household first is not a. And we need to know that it's not a butcher or a household that kills animals, and we need to know that it's not a place that's that sells meat. Because if they sell meat, it's possible that they kill, and that meat. And we have to know that it's not killed specifically for the monastic sake, but instead that it's that householder who practices the 10 virtues purchased for the monastic sake. So that we have to know that it was not slaughtered specifically for the bhikkshu's sake, but particularly went intentionally to buy meat that was not killed for the monastic seat and then offered it to the bhikshus. Similarly, what it says in the Dharmagupta Bhikkhu is that when you go into the house, if you go to the house of the person who's giving the meat, if you see the hat and the limbs or the hide and the hair and the blow and so forth, you don't see that there. And that individual is not a butcher. And is not only is it not the butcher, but is also someone who keeps the rules of the 10 virtues, someone who has given up taking life, and so someone who you believe this is someone who could not possibly have killed a sentient being for my sake. Not only are they not the householder is not a butcher, but it's also possible that they might have summoned a butcher to come in. So there's someone who keeps the 10 virtues, because they keep the rules of the 10 virtues, then you may not kill for yourself, nor may you have another kill for your sake. And so you believe that they wouldn't have summoned anyone else to slaughter the animal for your sake. Likewise, if we look at the Sarvastivada 10 scriptures of the Bunny, what it says is that it's like in the India they used to have great offering feasts. So they'd have a big pujas, basically the great offering rituals. In those times, many people would gather, and at that time, for that there would be the meat of animals slaughtered for that particular offering and that occasion, and people would distribute the meat. And even those celebrations, the bhikshus were not allowed to go to those situations, because if you go to that sector, if you were among the people out there, there would be animals slaughtered for that offering. There'd be the danger that you'd be included among that. You would not. For that reason, you would not be allowed to go to these great offering ceremonies. So, for example, if you go to purchase meat from a meat seller, then there's actually pure as to whether that meat is pure or not. Likewise, also in the Dharmaguptaka tradition, it says it's similar. It says that if you go to a place where people are making large offerings, then there is a danger that they'll offer you all sorts of different meat, and you may not eat that. Likewise, in our great exposition and our treasury of Abhartana, in both of these texts, is that after an animal has been killed, if you skin the animal, sell the animal, and cook the animals, these are like actions that are compatible with taking life. And so for these reasons and those sources, both the Sarvastivada and the Dharmaguptaka traditions, if we look at their presentations of what is the threefold purity of meat, they are more narrow or have a more detailed or stricter presentation of what is the threefold purity, and their practice is stricter. And so when you talk about Chinese Buddhism, or with our Tibetan Buddhism, there are the main sources from the Sarvastivada tradition. If when you talk about the way the 18 schools developed, in the general way, the basis that there are different bases for that. The first, there's one is the sources are the old histories of the Sri Lanka. That is one source for describing it, and one is the and there's a text in the Chinese tradition and also in the tradition that describe the way the 18 different schools developed. So these are the two main sources for describing the development of the 8 different schools. When we talk about this, then there are slight differences in terms of what the root schools are, but most scholars used to explain it that the 4 roots are probably the Theravada school, and so the Theravada school and the Mahasanga school. These are the 2 main schools, or the 2 original schools, or the 2 first divisions. And then they had some disagreements, and so they became, and then then from these 2 there were many different ones. Now the Sarvastivada school developed from the Theravada school. So our Tibetan tradition and our Vinaya practice all comes from the Sarvastivada, and the Chinese tradition primarily also is from comes within the Sarvastivada tradition. And so the practice of the threefold purity of meat is stricter in these Sarvastivada schools than in other schools. So normally we might think that it's fine to eat meat. And we say the reason we say is because the teacher allowed us to eat meat that is pure in 3 ways. But this is a kind of too simplistic way of thinking about it. It's like it's the way a child would think about it. And the reason for that is if they take Vinaya as a basis, then a monastic, if a monastic was to go, they'd have to go and beg for the food, right? So you go to a household and go to them. You couldn't go to a house and say, "Please give me meat." You couldn't say that. "Please give me meat, give me potatoes, give me meat." You weren't allowed to say that. You'd have to eat. You could only what that household gave you. You couldn't say, "I'm not going to take that. Take that away." If they give you potatoes, I am not going to eat potatoes. You have to give me meat. I give me chicken. You couldn't say, "I have to have your chicken." You couldn't say that. If you went to a poor house, if you said that, you'd say that the monastics are just they'd say those. How could that? If you went to a poor household, they'd say if the monk went to that household and said, "Please do this," then please give me meat. Then the household think, "I can't do that. We don't have that for ourselves. How can we give it?" And so when you are offered meat, then you have to investigate whether it is pure in the 3 ways. And if it is not pure, then even if you're so hungry that it's like your stomach is burning, then you're not allowed to eat it. So if you say that you can eat meat as pure in the 3 ways, it means that you cannot eat meat, just any old meat. It's not saying that you feel like you wish to eat and then go up to and then to prove that we're allowed to say that we're eat as pure in the 3 ways. It doesn't mean that you can eat whatever meat you get your fingers on. It doesn't mean that at all. You have to have a source for saying that you can do. So this is another thing that we need to really think about. So now I think that is probably enough for today. So now what I'd like to speak about tomorrow is how meat is prohibited in the Manaya. Now, of course, there's one thing. Now, one reason I need to explain this. There is the Sakya Pandita's it is said in the Devadatta's austerities that not eating meat was in Devadatta's austerities, and so for that reason, many people these days that we should eat meat because otherwise we're following one of Devadatta's austerities. That's one thing I need to speak about. And so now also in the Mahayana, there are some prohibitions about eating in general, regardless of whether it's pure in the three ways or not. And likewise, there are many debates about eating meat in Tibet. Now, I think there's actually not a whole lot of reason to debate about this, but I think I'd like to share some thoughts about this. Also, these days in the world, how many animals are slaughtered? And so I'd like to speak about that. And I'd like to speak about the harm that comes to the environment from slaughtering animals for meat. And I'd also like to give a little brief introduction to about how eating meat affects your health. And so I'd like to speak about that tomorrow. So that's about it. So the other day, I did have to I had to postpone it by one day. I've got a little bit tired. I was working too hard, and because my body got a little bit weak, and so. And also, I thought that since I'm speaking about eating meat and protecting sentient beings, so I thought I had to teach it as well as I could. So I delayed it by one day. So I beg your pardon for that. Now, actually, this teaching is to end on the 14th, but there are a couple of days when I was unable to eat, or a couple of days when I was unable to teach, and so for that reason we'll be extending the teachings by 2 days. So on the 15th we'll have a day off, and then on the 16th and the 17th we will have teachings. It's quite possible that what I say doesn't match what is in the announcement, but we're going to follow what's teaching in the announcement. My mind isn't so clear right now, so we'll follow what's written in the announcement. And now on the last day, I thought we would do some sort of a guru yoga. We've spent now a month or so in discussing the liberation story of Mikyo Dorje. And so, because it's to celebrate this great opportunity, I thought we should do the Guru Yoga. No, but I haven't decided what type of Guru Yoga. We should maybe do something. So I think we should do something related to Mikyo Dorje. There's the 4-session Guru Yoga, and I thought maybe I should write something for it, but I don't know if I have time to write anything. But in any case, on the 17th, we will conclude the teachings. As I mentioned, next year, during the spring teachings, I will continue to teach from the liberation story of Mikyo Dorje. So this is my plan. Yeah, actually, I thought I should say this on the last day, but if I say it today, it's better. We have the winter teaching, the Gunche, for the Kaju Shedras. And in addition now, we have the nuns. We've changed for the nuns Gunche Dhamma. I thought we should change that to the spring teaching, as I mentioned. So now we need a summer teaching. Now we can't do it all 4 seasons. For the autumn teaching, probably good, but I think it's okay to do 3 of them: the winter teaching, the spring teaching, and the summer teaching. Now for the summer teaching, I often speak with the people of the Shedras, and I'm able to do some service for the Shedras. But we also have the Tsoktra, the puja monks and nuns, and I haven't been able to do anything in particular for them. And so for this year, from now on, I thought I would start a summer teaching in particular for the monks and nuns who who do pujas. This would be primarily related with the ritual, with the practices of the Yidam deities. This is specifically said for the, it's maybe not a good way of saying it, but this is basically for the practice divisions. Sometimes we have like a conflict between the Shadras and the Tsoktra, between the study and the practice. And I don't know what word we can use for this, but for the sake of the ritual during the summer, we will have the summer teaching, and for their sake, we will have a special teaching related to the secret mantra practice. Now, I don't really know, but there's no choice but to pretend that I know what to say. So this is related to the secret mantra. It's not something that'll be for the public in general. It'll be primarily for the monasteries and the nunneries. If it is something for the whole public, then it wouldn't be right. So that is my plan. And so I thought I would mention that today. Now when we talk about the practice, I would allow everyone to, all of the Shadras and the nun-Shadras to participate as well. When I say that it's the non-spring teachers, if you think this is for the nuns, that are monasteries, I think it's not really for us. You possibly might misunderstand it in that way. And I didn't really have a chance to explain this clearly. So the specific students is a difference. The difference in who it's specifically taught for, but in actuality, it is for all of our monasteries and nunneries, and it's just important that you all understand this. So thank you. So now we recite the closing prayers.